Hi folks, how are we all doing? I'm the Reverend Danny Crosby, Unitarian minister serving congregations in Altrincham and Urmston in the northwest of England. I hope you're finding some love and witnessing the blessings in life in these very, very difficult times. It is hard, my friends, but we're all in this together. No one can deny that now. I'm offering these devotions as my little bit of hope, playing my role in being a part of the solution. I offer these devotions as a balm for the heart, the mind, the spirit and the soul. The title for this reflection is Deliver us to and not from the suffering in our world. The Theodicy Dilemma. So I invite us to still ourselves. Let us invite a loving presence to be here amongst us and to awaken from deep, deep within us. I have lit the flame of freedom in this cup of belonging, acceptance and love. We join together in our physical separation, but united in our devotion to life and to love. Help us to sing for joy like the birds each morning sing their faith in being alive and being here. May we know the deep connections that sustain us, the roots that hold and nurture us beneath the surface of our lives. May we remember that we are deeply connected in heart, mind, in spirit and in soul. May we be open to growth this day. May we be open to life this day, open to one another, open to this day, open to love this day, open to what might yet be. May we live loving and open lives. Amen. I published a blog spot a little while back in which I explored universalism and its many varied, dare I say, universal forms. When I was asked what kind of universalist I was, I said, well, I'm a universalist. Now the service that the blogspot was based on was delivered at 3 congregations that day. By the time I got to the 3rd, I could almost have done so without notes. I had all kinds of interesting responses to the service. Many folks seemed to identify with it strongly. Later that day, exhausted, I returned home and published the blogspot based upon the services. Whoever read that actual post received what I had intended to deliver, whereas those who heard it received versions as they manifested in the time and the space in which they heard them. Again, I got some very interesting responses to the published version. At the time, I did not have the energy to respond, but thankfully others did. There was a lovely conversation that developed, and one of the responses has stayed with me. I've been reflecting on it and my thoughts about it have grown since. This is what they wrote. The thing is, I worry about how much input a God of love is having, in that so many are hurt, killed, homeless, hungry, etc. It's a very good question. If we look at the world, at the suffering within the world, it is reasonable to ask in what sense could a God of love be involved in all of this? This question is now perhaps even more relevant as we are caught up in the coronavirus pandemic, wondering what will happen to us all. Of course, the response of many is none at all, for there is no God. Or others will say that God is not all loving. There's your proof. Might be all powerful, but not all loving. And others will say, well, it's all a mystery. We cannot understand how God's love operates. And then there are others that will suggest that we look at the helpers and that this love manifests in their actions. Are any of these answers adequate? Well, perhaps it's something to ponder. Now, suffering and the God of love is a question that has troubled theologians, philosophers, and plain old ordinary people for centuries. The question has been asked, and continues to be asked, as to what causes suffering and can suffering be overcome. Now, in some quarters it's been suggested that the root cause of suffering is what is called evil, which has led to the question that if evil exists, then how can God be all-powerful, ever-present, and all-loving? In theological circles, this question has become known as the Theodicy Dilemma. Theodicy from the Greek words theos, meaning God, and dik, meaning justice. The Theodicy Dilemma may be summed up by the following question about God asked by the 18th century philosopher David Hume. Is he willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Whence then is evil? This question encapsulates the whole theodicy debate. I also think the debate is captured in the following poem by Czesław Miłosz, titled Theodicy. Very short but to the point poem. So here's Theodicy by Czesław Miłosz. Sorry about my pronunciation, by the way. No, it won't do, my sweet theologians. Desire will not save the morality of God. If he created beings able to choose between good and evil, and they chose, and the world lies in iniquity, nevertheless there is pain and the undeserved torture of creatures which would find its explanation only by assuming the existence of an archetypal paradise and a pre-human downfall so grave that the world of matter received its shape from diabolical power. I think the poem is even more hard-hitting than Hume's questions. This from Miłosz, a Nobel Prize-winning poet who was a Polish Catholic, who spent most of his life wrestling with his own faith, but he remained a man of faith. The real people of faith always wrestle. It's a faithful thing to wrestle with your own faith, to keep questioning. Now, I remember exploring theodicy in depth while training for the ministry. I probably spent more time on the piece I wrote on the subject than any other, which showed in my final marks, by the way. I never got better marks than in this one. I struggled and I wrestled, as so many have no doubt done throughout human history. Looking back, I can see how important it was for me to do so. By the way, I struggled once again while trying to put the service together that this reflection is taken from. I am grateful for the struggle, as I have learnt in my time as a minister that a large part of the work is to be with others in their suffering, often seemingly senseless suffering, by the way. And of course, if anybody knows my story, it is suffering that brought me into ministry in the first place. Finding meaning from tragic suffering. It's at the core of it all, actually. Finding the meaning, doing something from that suffering. Love born from that suffering. I remember as I was researching the essay, wrestling for hours in the library, walking in the park with this question, going round and round, and I continue to do so to this day. I found my own unsettled faith in it, and as a result a greater purpose has emerged. If I've learned anything from suffering, it's that I cannot take away the suffering of anybody else, but I can be with them in it. I can walk side by side with them in it. I've learned that in so doing, The God of my limited understanding comes into being once more, for God walks with me, perhaps ahead of me sometimes. When I think of that famous footsteps poem, by the way, I don't think of being carried by God. I think of following those footsteps, by the way. I'm not sure God carries, but God walks with, sometimes in front, sometimes behind, sometimes side by side, but always there. A bit like we're having to walk when we're doing our exercise at the moment, not so much side by side, but separate as we meet others on the pathway. Think about it. Think about it. Still there. That love is still there. The Christian theologians and many other traditions, of course, have wrestled for centuries with the theodicy question. One strand, beginning with Augustine of Hippo, concluded that evil was the absence of good in a person's life and was the consequence of God-given free will. He believed that God was aware of the potential misuse of free will, but allowed it, as to deny it would be worse than to allow the evil that could stem from it. He believed that the fall of Adam, his original sin, had permanently corrupted humanity and compelled people through destructive behaviour to develop habitual wickedness. He believed that the root of our troubles was our inability to accept our creation and all that our creation entails. Therefore, we do not submit to God and instead submit to habitual evil, which creates suffering for all. Strong language. But for the medieval theologian Thomas Aquinas, evil resulted from the absence of God, the lack of a positive substance, in the same way that blindness is the absence of sight. He suggested that there is no such thing as pure evil, just that something created good has become defective, a different starting point. One of the leading figures of the Reformation, Jean Calvin, believed in God's divine plan or predestination. Some double predestination, some say. He believed that nothing took place by chance and that God was involved in every aspect of life. Like Augustine, he believed that evil was caused by man's fall and that we are enslaved by this original sin. During the 20th century, theologians have attempted from a variety of standpoints to understand the nature of evil, suffering, and of course, the nature of God. John Hick offered a very different view to that followed by Augustine, Aquinas and Calvin, and traces his thinking back to Irenaeus. He saw the world as a veil of soul-making where people are shaped by God, who desires all creatures to grow into relationship with him. Therefore, suffering is essential for this to take place. He claimed that God is, in some sense, hidden within creation, and that by coming to terms with suffering is a part of this process of discovering God, if you like. And through this leads to salvation, which occurs when humans enjoy the perfect relationship with God. And Richard Swinburne's natural law theodicy follows a similar line, claiming that natural evil has to exist if humans are to make the correct choices that will present human evil. It's kind of an education, if you like. But is that good enough? Sounds pretty cruel, actually. Dorothy Soel critiqued Hick's position, claiming that suffering caused by God cannot be justified. As the famous quotation goes, no heaven can rectify Auschwitz. The ends don't justify the means, if you like. She was critical of this Christian masochism and its concomitant theological sadism, as she described it, claiming that human beings have become powerless, masochistic accomplices to the sadistic God. She believed that to truly know God is to see him as the God who suffers with humanity. God is with us. God is with us. The key question for Soel was, who are the victims and who are the oppressors? For her, God suffers with the victim, that God is present there within the suffering. Her position is so powerfully illustrated in the following extract told by Elie Wiesel of two men and a small boy being hung by SS guards. It comes from his seminal work, The Night, a recollection from Auschwitz. Wiesel recalls, "Where is God? Where is he?" someone behind me asked. But the third rope was still moving. Being so light, the child was still alive. For more than half an hour he stayed there, struggling between life and death, dying in slow agony under our eyes. And we had to look him full in the face. Behind me I heard the same man asking, "Where is God now?" And I heard a voice within me answer him, "Where is he? Here he is, hanging here on the gallows. Here he is, hanging here on the gallows." This is an image as powerful as the crucifixion, an image portraying this idea that God suffers with the world, that God is here in the suffering. But is that all powerful? Maybe God's nature is different to what some of these theologians have suggested. Now, process theology and others influenced by it have offered other explanations as to why suffering occurs. Process theology sees all entities as self-creative and therefore free. This includes the smallest particles which, like humans, are capable of responding to God. Therefore, they can reject God's purpose, and it is this rejection that creates the suffering in the world. Not just human rejection, but the rejection of material life too. Process theology does not see humanity as corrupt in nature. Instead, it claims that often we fail to live up to our potential. It recognises God as being infinite, but also relative, both immanent and transcendent. It offers an explanation for both human and natural suffering. It is suggested that as man has emerged from the natural world, human feeling and emotions must be present in all of creation. In essence, it suggests life can respond to the lure of divine love, but does not always do so, and the suffering results in the failure to respond. So we've explored many attempts to reconcile suffering with an all-powerful God, and I'm not sure any of them fully succeed. None of them are adequate, and all resort to some extent to mystery. None give a clear picture of an all-loving, all-powerful God who is constant and never changing. So does this mean that God is dead, as Nietzsche suggested in The Gay Science, and as many others have suggested that before and since? Does it suggest that? We must decide that ourselves. And what do I believe? What do I believe? You may well ask. Well, I for one do respond to the idea of a God of love, as my experiences and observations of life suggest this. I also experience this life coming to life as I'm present with those who suffer and do all I can to be with them in their suffering and pain. But I cannot prove that beyond any doubt. Like the greater and the lesser theologians, I'm a lesser theologian, I too resort to mystery. I am sorry if this answer is inadequate, but it's my honest view. No doubt this inadequate response will lead to some to reject the whole idea of God, but I cannot reject the whole God concept. For I do know and experience this lure of divine love. I feel drawn by it constantly to come outside of myself, beyond the confines of my little self. This love comes alive in mine and the response of others to suffering. It comes to life as I turn toward rather than turn away from life itself. I have felt and experienced this powerfully these last few weeks, as we all have suffered together. And I felt God suffering with us. And this love, this empathy, this compassion has spurred me and others on to do what we can to help in whatever ways we can. Look at their helpers, look at how we have responded. I am a universalist in every sense of the word. And this growing sense of universalism helps me to live faithfully in love in a world in which there is so much beauty. Look outside at the spring, but also so much suffering. And I accept that no matter how loving I and others live, that horrific, dare I say, evil things will happen both personally and universally. I will hurt people too. Maybe not intentionally, but I will. I will fall short of what I would like to be. But it's the God of love who is so great and ever compelling to me that allows me to overcome even the most horrific situations with a response grown from a sacred reverence for life itself. This is the God of love that I worship, but that's way beyond my understanding. And I know many others that connect to that too, that are inspired by that are given the strength to keep turning by that faith and action. I have come to believe that it is our holy duty to respond to the suffering of others, to stand in solidarity with them, to act in holy compassion, and never to declare the other as someone less than human. In my prayers, I ask this universal love to help me feel a deep connection to all life and to bring some healing to the world in which I live and the world beyond my being too. It is, I believe, our holy duty to begin to bring healing to our world, to wipe the tears that flow from the eyes of our humanity and to repair the tears in the fabric of the world, to bring compassion and love to those in fear, to bind up the broken and to bring wholeness to those who feel separated from the loving life. This is the call of love from the God of my limited understanding. It's this that lures me on each and every day. It is a call that asks my senses to be open to the world, and instead of being delivered from evil, it's a call from an ever-loving God that asks me to be delivered to the suffering in the world, not from it, but to it. Not to detach myself, not to transcend it, but to be a part of it and to be transformed by it. And I'm sorry if it does not answer why a God of love would allow suffering. I am sorry if that's not good enough. I'm sorry. It's all I've got. All I can offer is a loving purpose that comes to life in this beautiful and at times suffering world that binds up the broken. I'm going to end this devotion with a poem by Billy Collins titled See No Evil. Following this poem, some final words of blessing. See No Evil by Billy Collins. No one expected all three of them to sit there on their tree stumps forever, their scents covered with their sinuous paws, so as to shut out the vile, nefarious world. As it happened, it was the one on the left who was the first to desert his post. Uncupping his ears, then loping off into the orbit of rumours and lies, but also into the realm of symphonies, the sound of water tumbling over rocks and wind stirring the leafy domes of trees. Then the monkey on the right lowered his hands from his wide mouth and slipped away in search of someone to talk to, some news he could spread, maybe something to curse or shout about. And that left the monkey in the middle, alone in his silent vigil, shielding his eyes from depravity's spectacle, blind to the man whipping his horse, the woman shaking her baby in the air, but also unable to see the russet sun on a rough shelf of rock and apples in the grass at the base of a tree. Sometimes he wonders about the other two, listens for the faint sounds of their breathing up there on the mantel alongside the clock and candlesticks. And sometimes, in the quiet nights, in the quiet house, he wishes he could break the silence with a question. But he knows the one on his right would not be able to hear, and the one on his left, according to their sacred oath, the one they all took with one paw raised, is forbidden for ever to speak. Even in reply. See no, hear no, speak no. Don't deliver me from, deliver me to the suffering in the world. That's where I'll find God. I'm going to end with some final words of blessing. You know, we don't bless enough. We're here to bless. That's what we're here for. We ought to bless more. Everyone can bless with their loving presence. Why not try offering blessings throughout this day and in all the days to come? Become the blessing you've been waiting for. Become that blessing. So I invite us to still ourselves one final time today. May the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us now and always. And may the love of God be with us. May the love of God be with us in all that we feel, in all that we think, in all that we say, in all that we do.